and welcome to a video on solving quadratic inequalities. Now, whenever we're solving any quadratic inequality, I always like to follow these three steps here. So if we go through this first example, x squared plus 2x minus 8 is greater than 0. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this inequality to an equation. And now I'm going to go ahead and solve this equation. So let's think about factorising this. So two numbers that multiply together to get negative 8 and add together to get positive 2. Well, those two numbers are going to be negative 2 and positive 4. So we're going to have x minus 2 times x plus 4 equals 0. So let's just check that. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8 and 4 minus 2 is positive 2. So that's correct. And now you can see that we're going to have two solutions to this equation. So one of our solutions is going to be x equals positive 2. And the other solution is going to be when x is equal to negative 4. So if we were to solve this equation, these would be our two solutions. But we're not solving this equation, we're solving this inequality. So the next thing to do is sketch our graph. Now when we're sketching a graph, it is important to remember it is only a sketch, so it doesn't need to be perfect. So we just need the key points. So first of all, let's plot our roots. So we have x equals 2, let's say that's there, and negative 4, let's say that's over here. And now we need to draw our curve in. So is it going to be an N shape or a U shape? Well, it's going to be a U shape because we have a positive coefficient on the x squared term. So it's going to look something like this. And again, this is not perfect by any means. So we've got our graph of our quadratic. Now let's go back to our inequality. And we need to look at what parts of our graph are greater than the line y equals 0. So let's first of all draw our line y equals 0 in. So here is our line y equals 0. So we're looking at everything greater than this line. So we're looking at all of these values up here and all of these values up here. Now what values of x correspond to all of these points? Well, it's going to be everything to the left of this point over here and everything to the right of this point over here. Notice if we select this point for x, you can see that our y value is definitely greater than 0. And it's the same over here. This value for x will give us a y value greater than 0. But if we were to select this point, we can see that the y value is clearly less than 0. So this is definitely not included. So what are our solutions? Well, it's going to be everything less than negative 4. So we can write x has to be less than negative 4. Or we could say everything greater than positive 2. So x has to be greater than 2. So this here is our solution. Okay, it's your turn now. So please pause the video and see if you can solve this quadratic inequality and make sure you follow these three steps. Okay, so step number 1, we are going to change this inequality to an equation. And now let's solve our equation. So two numbers that multiply to get 10 and sum to get 7. Well, those two numbers are 2 and 5. So this is going to be x plus 2 in one bracket and then x plus 5 in our other bracket, and that equals 0. So our two solutions will be x is equal to negative 2 or x is equal to negative 5. And now we can sketch our graph. So let's first of all plot our two roots. So we have x equals negative 2. Let's say that's over here, negative 2. And let's say we have negative 5, which is over here. And just like before, it's going to be a U shape because we've got a positive coefficient. So it's going to look something like that. And now let's go back to our original inequality and have a look at the sign. So we're looking at all of the values that are greater than the line y equals 0. So here is our line y equals 0. And just like before, we are looking at all of the values greater than this line. So these values over here and these values over here. So in terms of what x values these correspond to, well, it's going to be everything to the left of negative 5. So we can write x has to be less than negative 5. Or it's all of these values along here, and these values will be greater than negative 2. So x has to be greater than negative 2. So this is our solution here. Okay, let's do another one. So pause the video and see if you can solve this inequality here. Okay, so first thing to do, let's change this inequality to an equation. And now let's solve this equation. So two numbers that multiply to get negative 6 and sum to get negative 5. Well, one of them has to be negative and the larger one has to be negative. So I think negative 6 and positive 1 would work. So x minus 6 times x plus 1 equals 0. And you can always check this by expanding the brackets. So what are our solutions? Well, we're going to have two solutions. One of them will be positive 6, or our other solution will be x equals negative 1. So now we can sketch the graph. So let's plot our two solutions, our roots. So let's say that this is positive 6 and this here is negative 1. And again, just like before, we have a U shape. So it's going to look something like that. Now let's go back to our inequality. Now this time it's different. We are looking at all of the values that are less than the line y equals 0. So here is our line y equals 0, but this time we're looking at everything less than 0. So we are going to look at everything underneath the line. Okay, so all of these points here. Now, what x values correspond to these points? Well, it's going to be everything between negative 1 and 6. So it's going to be all of these x values here. So everything between negative 1 and 6 will correspond to a y value below the line. So if we were to write this out as an inequality, we're not going to have two separate inequalities like we did with the previous examples. We're just going to have one inequality. So if we think about our lower bound and upper bound, our lower bound is negative 1 and our upper bound is 6. So it's going to be everything greater than negative 1, but everything less than 6. So this here is our solution. Okay, I've got one more question for you to have a go at. So this one here, first of all, we are going to change this inequality to an equation. And now to factorise this quadratic, well, this just factorises to x plus 5 in one bracket and then x minus 5 in another bracket. Now, if you're a bit unsure of how I got this, then this is called a difference of squares, and I do have a video dedicated to this topic. So if you're a bit unsure, I recommend go back and watching that video. So that equals 0, and now we've got two solutions. We've got x is equal to negative 5, or x is going to be equal to positive 5. So we've solved the equation. Now let's sketch the graph. So if we plot our two roots, so let's say that was negative 5, and this point here is positive 5. Again, we're going to have a U-shape quadratic, so it's going to go something like this. So that's probably my worst attempt so far, but hey-ho, we'll go with it. It's not that important, like I said. So let's go back and look at our original inequality, and we're looking at all of the values greater than or equal to 0. So here is our line y equals 0, and we're going to be looking at everything greater than 0. So everything greater than 0, but this time, because it can equal 0, we have to include this point as well. Likewise, we're going to be looking at all of these points here, but we are going to include this point because that is on the line. So if we write down what the inequalities are, well, it's going to be everything less than negative 5 because it's everything to the left. It will be x is less than negative 5, but it also includes 5, so we have to include the equals symbol. Or it's going to be everything greater, so everything to the right of 5. And again, we need to include the equal symbol because it also includes 5. So this is our final solution. Now, I'm going to leave it there for this particular video, but as this is a higher tier topic, I will do another video on quadratic inequalities with some slightly trickier examples. But regardless of how difficult the inequalities are, if you follow these same 3 steps each time, it should make your life a lot easier when you're solving these types of problems. So thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Take care.